It's been in the back of my mind for quite a while, the whole climate change debate, environmental issues growing, pollution. So I've always felt very strongly about
The discovery that shook the palace. It was the sort of morning that felt almost suspended in time. Windsor's winter air hung still and cold, and the pale sun cast muted reflections along the ancient stone walls of the castle. Inside Clarence House, Prince William had arrived earlier than usual, hoping for a rare moment of quiet before the day's duties began. The early hours were typically reserved for private briefings, handwritten notes, and a few minutes of solitude. Those who worked closest to him had observed that he cherished these small pockets of calm. They provided structure in a life that had offered little room for stillness. On that morning, however, serenity was short-lived. Before he could even take a sip of the tea waiting near his desk, an aide entered with a look that signaled urgent, delicate business. There was no rush of footsteps, no raised voice, only the unmistakable tension of someone carrying news the palace never wanted to hear. The aide requested a confidential moment. William, sensing the weight behind the request, closed the folder in front of him and stood. A routine inspection at Royal Lodge had been conducted the previous day. Royal Lodge, with its ivy-wrapped exterior and tree-lined paths, had for years been a peaceful residence tucked within the Windsor estate. It had long been the home of Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, a woman who had known both the warmth and the chill of royal life. The inspection was meant to ensure that certain sections of the property were structurally sound and up to date with modern security requirements. No one anticipated anything unusual. Yet as maintenance staff cleared out an older wing of the property, a room sealed for many years came to light. Inside that room was no ordinary collection of dusty keepsakes. Instead, investigators uncovered a set of boxes containing documents, recorded tapes, and personal writings whose existence raised immediate concern. The labeling was inconsistent, the handwriting varied, and the dates spanned decades. The boxes did not appear to belong to the Duchess, nor did they match any of the archival materials the palace had officially catalogued over the years. As aides relayed the discovery to Prince William, there was a moment when the room seemed to grow quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. He asked for specifics. What had been found? Why were the documents alarming? Has the Duchess known anything about them? Many of the answers were uncertain, but the emerging details painted a troubling picture. Some documents referenced private meetings held within palace grounds during the years of escalating turmoil between the late Princess Diana and senior royal advisors. Others included personal reflections allegedly written by individuals who should never have had such intimate knowledge of family matters. Even more unsettling were transcripts of conversations involving the young princes, moments from their childhood that had no business being documented by outsiders. These were not simply forgotten papers. They were fragments of the most painful and politically volatile years in modern royal history. Prince William listened with a calm exterior, but those present noticed a shift in his expression. A tightening of the jaw, a slight stillness behind the eyes. It was the expression of a man forced to revisit memories he had spent years learning to compartmentalize. Memories of chaos, press intrusion, and the heartbreaking disintegration of his parents' marriage. The palace staff continued. The materials had been found in a corner room rarely entered for the better part of 2 decades. The previous occupant had used it briefly as a storage space before falling ill, and since then it had been left untouched. Has the Duchess ever examined the room? Investigators did not believe so. It appeared that the boxes had been placed there without her involvement, or possibly without her knowledge at all. Outside in the wider estate, word of the discovery began to ripple quietly among senior staff, each whisper adding another layer of unease. The Duchess had long been a figure of contradiction within the royal world. Warm, affable, and endlessly generous, yet often drawn into controversy through a combination of misfortune, misplaced trust, and moments of personal difficulty. She had made mistakes, yes, but never anything that suggested betrayal of the crown. The idea that her home now held documents capable of igniting an international scandal felt both implausible and deeply worrying. By midday, William had cleared his schedule. He secluded himself in a private meeting room with senior advisors and security officials. The mood was tense but focused. The monarchy had weathered storms before, some of them devastating. Yet this discovery was unique. It was not an attack from the press or a public misstep. It was a ghost from the past, re-emerging without warning. William understood better than most the fragility of the monarchy's narrative. The passing of the late Queen had marked the end of an era defined by duty, restraint, and quiet resilience. His father, King Charles, was navigating a new age with new scrutiny, new expectations, and fewer margins for error. The public, while fascinated by royal life, had grown increasingly critical of secrecy. And now a discovery capable of reopening old wounds threatened to disturb the delicate equilibrium they fought to maintain. As dusk approached, a meeting was arranged between the future king and the palace's legal advisors. The documents found at Royal Lodge could not be dismissed as mere curiosities. They needed to be authenticated, their origins traced, and the motives behind their storage examined. Was someone using Royal Lodge as a hiding place? And if so, why choose the home of the Duchess, a woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny? Hours later, after the last advisor had left the room, William remained alone for several minutes. He walked to the tall window and gazed outward, watching the winter light fade behind the towers of Windsor. The weight of his role pressed more heavily upon him than usual. He was not only a son who had lost his mother, he was a future king tasked with protecting her memory, his family's integrity, and the stability of an institution older than the nation itself. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson received the first indication that something serious had occurred. A discreet message informed her that palace officials needed to discuss an unexpected matter involving her estate. She was recovering from health challenges and had hoped to spend her days quietly with family. Now she sensed that her peace was about to be disrupted. The situation was unfolding faster than anyone anticipated, and although no one yet understood the full scope of the discovery, one thing was already clear. Whatever had been found in Sarah Ferguson's house had the power to shake the monarchy, and this was only the beginning. William's reaction and the gravity of what was found. Prince William had spent his entire adult life being measured, steady, and composed. Those who worked closest to him knew that he rarely reacted impulsively. Yet when the palace archivists entered the briefing room carrying a selection of the most troubling documents from Royal Lodge, an unmistakable tension settled into his posture. He straightened slightly, his expression alert. He thanked them quietly, then gestured for the folders to be placed before him. The first document he opened was a handwritten memo referencing Princess Diana. It had been penned by an individual with no formal authority within the royal household, someone who should never have had access to the intimate details described on the page. The memo reflected observations from the 1990s, written in a tone that blurred the line between personal opinion and intrusive analysis. As William read, his breathing slowed. He turned the page gently, but with a deliberateness that betrayed the storm building beneath the surface. When he looked up, the room felt unusually still. A senior advisor asked if he wished to stop. He shook his head once. No, he needed to know everything. The second document was far worse. It contained a series of transcribed conversations involving Princess Diana and senior royal advisors at a time of intense public scrutiny. The conversations appeared to be summaries, not official transcripts, suggesting that someone had listened, watched, or gathered information through unofficial means. William read only a few lines before closing the folder with greater force than expected. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightened. The archivists continued. Among the materials were notes about the young princes, their schooling, their private moments within Kensington Palace, and mentions of emotional challenges they faced in the aftermath of their parents' separation. These were observations that should never have been written down, let alone stored in a private residence outside royal control. William leaned forward, fingers pressed together as he processed the unfolding implications. The discovery was no longer merely an archival oddity. It hinted at something more disturbing. Someone, years ago, had documented the vulnerabilities of his family, perhaps for leverage, perhaps for influence, perhaps for reasons still unknown. He asked the officials how the documents had been retrieved. They explained the room had been sealed behind a door swollen by years of humidity. Boxes were stacked without order, suggesting hurried placement rather than careful storage. Some items had been wrapped in materials inconsistent with household supplies. These details only deepened the mystery. An advisor then raised the question William himself had been avoiding. Could the Duchess of York have been aware of the room's contents? William responded carefully. He reminded them that assumptions would only cloud their judgment. Whatever Sarah Ferguson had or had not known, she deserved the opportunity to speak before conclusions were drawn. Yet despite his words, a silent worry crept into his thoughts. The Duchess had endured financial struggles, questionable advisors, and individuals who had taken advantage of her trusting nature. Any of those figures could have placed the items in her home. Has someone used her vulnerability as a shield? William stood and paced slowly toward the window, a familiar movement that signaled he needed space to think. The cold winter light fell across his face, revealing a flicker of something rarely seen in him. Anger. Controlled, quiet, but unmistakable. Not at the Duchess, not at the staff, but at the idea that someone had exploited the most painful chapters of his life. When he turned back to the room, his voice was calm, but weighted with resolve. The documents must be secured immediately. The review would continue under complete confidentiality. No copies, no leaks, no speculation. The stability of the monarchy required precision, not panic. A security official then revealed something else. Some items included dates aligning with moments of high tension between the palace and the press. The materials suggested that certain outsiders may have attempted to predict or influence internal discussions. While no direct threat was present, the mere implication chilled the room. Prince William asked for a list of every person who had visited Royal Lodge during the 2 decades in question. It would be a long list, but he insisted on beginning the process immediately. The investigation would be fair but thorough. It had to be. Meanwhile, word spread quietly among senior household staff that something significant had occurred. No details were shared, but the atmosphere carried an unmistakable gravity. Departments acted with heightened caution, and certain archival areas were temporarily restricted. Sarah Ferguson received her first official communication late in the afternoon. Her response was immediate. She asked to speak with Prince William personally, insisting she wanted transparency and cooperation. Her tone, according to those who heard it, carried both fear and sincerity. Prince William agreed to the meeting, but not before reviewing the remaining documents. He wanted a complete understanding before entering any conversation with her. He owed her respect, but he also owed the crown clarity. As the daylight dimmed and the corridors of Windsor fell into evening silence, William sat once more with the documents. One page at a time, he read pieces of the past he had long tried to protect. Some passages hurt. Others shocked him. Each one tightened the knot in his stomach. This was no simple misunderstanding, no careless mistake. Something deliberate had taken place within the walls of Royal Lodge many years ago. And now that it had resurfaced, the monarchy would have to confront whatever truths lay hidden within those boxes. By nightfall, William knew one thing with certainty. The investigation would not end with documents alone. The past had resurfaced, and he would not allow it to unravel the present. Sarah Ferguson breaks her silence. The Duchess of York had weathered many storms in her life, but the summons she received from the palace carried a weight she had not felt in years. She was sitting in a quiet corner of Royal Lodge when her phone buzzed with a message requesting an immediate meeting. The moment she read it, a familiar sinking sensation settled in her chest. In the royal world, very few matters required direct intervention from a future king. Fewer still came cloaked in such urgency. For the past months, the Duchess had been recovering from medical treatments that demanded rest and calm. She had embraced the quiet, surrounding herself with books, soft blankets, and the reassuring presence of her dogs. Royal Lodge, with its sweeping lawns and gentle creaks of age, had become her sanctuary. But as soon as the message appeared, the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt haunted by an unseen weight. She dressed carefully, choosing a dark coat and a simple scarf. No flamboyant colors, no bold accessories. Today required seriousness, humility, and clarity. She stepped outside into the cold air, pausing for a moment to gather her breath before entering the waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away from the estate, she stared through the window, watching the winter branches blur into streaks of gray. She wondered what on earth could have triggered such a crisis. When she arrived at the palace, she was ushered through private corridors she had walked many times before, though never under circumstances quite like this. Staff greeted her politely, but their expressions were guarded. She could sense the tension pressing down on the atmosphere like a heavy curtain. It reminded her of the days when the palace was aflame with whispers about her marriage, her finances, or her missteps. Those memories still stung. A member of William's staff opened the door to a small drawing room and invited her inside. The room was warm, lit by soft lamps, its walls lined with portraits of monarchs across centuries. The Duchess took a seat, folding her gloved hands together as she waited. The ticking of a clock echoed softly in the background, marking each second with unnerving precision. The door opened again. Prince William stepped inside. He offered a polite greeting, neither warm nor cold, simply neutral. It was the neutrality that unsettled her the most. In William's face, she saw the boy she had once known, the young man who had grown into a steady, dignified future king. But she also saw the protector of the crown, the guardian of his mother's memory, and the head of a family constantly under siege. He sat opposite her. The silence between them was brief, but charged. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice calm but undeniably serious. The Duchess nodded, her throat tight. "Of course. I sensed something was wrong. Please tell me." William did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward with accusation. Instead, he spoke carefully, explaining that a room on her property had been opened during a routine inspection. Inside the room, boxes had been discovered, that the contents were not ordinary personal belongings but documents and recordings touching on some of the most sensitive periods in modern royal history. As he spoke, the Duchess pressed a hand to her mouth. Her heart raced. She felt the floor shift beneath her as understanding dawned. Something hidden, something she had never seen, had been sitting inside her own home. She looked at William with wide, earnest eyes. "I swear I did not know. I had no idea anything like that was there." William studied her quietly. There was no hostility, but there was caution. He needed truth, certainty, and transparency. The institution demanded it, and so did he. The Duchess leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. She explained that the room in question had not been opened in many years. At one point, the property had been filled with helpers, movers, organizers, assistants, and occasionally even opportunists. She had, over the decades, allowed people to come and go during periods of upheaval. Some offered help, some offered advice, some offered friendship. And some, she now realized, might have used her vulnerability for their own ends. She recalled vaguely that nearly 20 years earlier, during a difficult financial period, an associate had brought over several boxes. At the time, she assumed they were items related to her daughters or to her past charitable engagements. She never investigated. She had not thought twice about them. She had simply asked someone to store them in a spare room. William listened, his expression thoughtful. He was not naive. He knew the Duchess had lived through years filled with turbulence and unwise acquaintances. He also knew she had rarely acted with malice. But intent was only one part of the equation. Consequence was another. She spoke again, more emotional now. "The idea that my home has been used for something improper, it horrifies me, truly. I would never hide something like this. Never." Her sincerity was evident, but sincerity alone could not solve the problem. William asked her gently if she remembered any individuals, any visitors, any unusual deliveries during the years when the room may have been accessed. The Duchess tried to recall specifics, but time had blurred many of the details. Names came to mind, half-remembered faces, a few vague moments that suddenly seemed loaded with new meaning. "I was careless with trust," she admitted, her voice soft. "I always have been." William leaned back slightly. That was the closest she could come to explaining the inexplicable. The Duchess then expressed something that visibly affected him. She feared for her daughters. She feared they would be pulled into speculation or judged by association. She feared that yet another misunderstanding or scandal linked to her would cast a shadow over their growing public roles. William's expression softened, if only briefly. He reassured her that her daughters would be protected from unnecessary exposure. No conclusions would be drawn until the review was complete. When the meeting ended, the Duchess stood carefully, offering a quiet thank you before leaving the room. As she walked down the corridor, the portrait seemed to watch her with mute curiosity. She felt as though the tapestries and stone walls carried the weight of centuries of royal secrets, and somehow she had stumbled into one of the darkest without even knowing it. Outside, the winter air hit her face sharply. She took a long breath, holding back tears. Whatever had been found inside Royal Lodge was not her doing, but it was now part of her responsibility. She knew the story would unfold further, and she knew with a sinking heart that the worst revelations were likely still ahead. Inside the palace, William returned to the investigation room. There were still boxes to examine, still mysteries to unravel, and still the nagging sense that this was not merely a forgotten archive. It was something closer to a buried scheme, and the next discovery would confirm it. The final box and the shocking revelation. Night had settled over Windsor by the time the final box from Royal Lodge was brought into the secure review suite. The corridors were quiet, lit only by soft golden sconces, the kind that made shadows stretch across the walls like watchful silhouettes. Most of the palace staff had already gone home, unaware that the most consequential discovery of the entire investigation was still waiting, sealed within aging cardboard and dust. The archivists moved carefully. They wore gloves not only to protect the delicate contents, but because they sensed instinctively that whatever lay inside deserved reverence. The box itself appeared different from the others. Its label was barely legible, written in ink so faded it seemed older than the box. The tape sealing it had dried and cracked, suggesting it had not been opened in decades. A senior archivist, a man who had handled some of the Crown's most sensitive materials for nearly 3 decades, paused for a moment before cutting the tape. He later said it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing a single step forward could reveal a landscape no one was prepared for. When the box was finally opened, a musty scent escaped, carrying with it the unmistakable aura of long-forgotten secrets. Inside was a layer of loose papers, scribbled notes, half-written memos, and envelopes with no addressees. But beneath that disordered stack lay something far more disturbing. A smaller container, sealed tightly, marked only with a series of initials. No date, no explanation. The room grew still. The archivist lifted the container gently and opened it. What he found inside made him inhale sharply. Photographs, but not ordinary photographs. These were taken in locations where photography was strictly forbidden. Private drawing rooms, interior courtyard spaces never open to the public. Corridors within Kensington Palace that only family and select staff were ever allowed to enter. The photographs were grainy, shot from awkward angles as though captured covertly. Some were blurred, but many were unmistakably clear. The archivist examined the first few images. Then he signaled for a security official to alert Prince William immediately. William arrived less than 20 minutes later, dressed not for formality but for urgency. His expression was composed, but there was a tension to his movements that betrayed anticipation and dread. The archivist explained what they had found. William asked to see everything. They dimmed the lights to protect the photos from harsh glare. The first image was placed on the table. William stared. The photograph showed him at university age, walking through a secluded corridor, visibly unaware he was being watched. He studied it for a long moment, his brows drawn together. Then came the next image, a private family garden gathering at Kensington Palace. He recognized the moment. It was one of the rare weekends when both he and Harry had been at home together, shortly after the world had lost their mother. They had believed themselves safe from prying eyes. The third photograph changed the entire atmosphere. It was Princess Diana. Not in a public setting, not in a formal royal engagement. but in a candid, vulnerable moment inside Kensington Palace. She appeared tired, deep in thought, unaware that her privacy had been invaded. The image felt like an intrusion even decades later. William's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Another photograph showed a senior advisor entering a meeting room, carrying a folder marked confidential. The angle suggested the photographer had not been inside the room, but had taken the picture through a crack in the door or from a shadowed corner. The implications were devastating. Someone had surveilled the royal family, and someone with access, someone discreet, someone who understood where the blind spots in palace supervision existed, and someone who, for reasons yet unknown, had chosen to hide the evidence inside the home of the Duchess of York. William placed both palms flat on the table as he leaned over the photographs, his jaw tightening with each passing second. The archivists remained silent, sensing that this was no longer purely an archival discovery. It was a violation of trust so deep it unsettled the very foundation of royal privacy. He lifted one photo and examined the edges. It had the quality of a camera that was neither cheap nor professional. Something discreet, portable, able to shoot quickly without drawing attention. The dates on the back were handwritten. The earliest was from the late 1990s, the latest from the early 2000s. This was not a single act of intrusion, it was a pattern. William finally looked up. His voice, quiet but edged with steel, carried an unmistakable authority. "Who else has seen these?" The archivist answered truthfully. "Only 2 people. The room, no one else." William nodded. "They must remain secured. No one outside this circle can know." He did not raise his voice. He did not pace. But inside him, resentments and memories stirred like dust shaken from a long-locked room. His mother's battles with intrusion, her fear of being watched, her constant struggle against forces that operated in the shadows. He thought of the chaos, the conspiracies, the whispering campaigns. The idea that someone within their perimeter had recorded her without her knowledge was a blow he felt physically. The shock deepened as the archivists displayed a final envelope found at the bottom of the box. Inside were handwritten notes describing the layout of specific palace rooms, including where security cameras were positioned and, more disturbingly, where blind spots existed. William froze. This was not sentimentality. This was infiltration. Whoever created these notes had knowledge only attainable through proximity. Perhaps a staff member, perhaps an advisor, perhaps someone posing as harmless. And though years had passed, the breach carried implications for the present. The archivist then revealed the last detail. The smaller container holding the photographs had been sealed more carefully than the rest of the materials. That suggested deliberate concealment rather than accidental storage. William's face hardened. There was no anger in his expression, only a chilling clarity. Someone had used Sarah Ferguson's home as a hiding place for surveillance evidence. Perhaps because her residence, unlike official palace buildings, was less likely to undergo systematic security sweeps. Perhaps because her past controversies made her the perfect unintentional shield. Or perhaps because the person responsible believed no one would ever look. As the meeting ended, William issued quiet but firm orders. The photographs would be placed in the highest security archive. Their origin would be investigated discreetly and thoroughly. Every name, every visitor, every staff member connected to Royal Lodge during the relevant years would be reviewed. Outside, the night had grown darker. Windsor's grounds were silent, but inside, a storm had begun. Prince William walked slowly toward a private chamber. The weight of the photographs pressed heavily upon him. They were not only relics of intrusion, they were symbols of how deeply the past could reach into the present. And for the first time, he understood that this was not merely an unsettling discovery. It was a threat. Damage control, strategy, and a future king's decision. By the following morning, the palace was stirring with a quiet urgency. The corridors hummed with a restrained energy, the kind that signaled an internal crisis without a single word spoken aloud. Every footstep seemed to echo more sharply, every door click resonating as though amplified by the tension holding the building together. Prince William arrived early for the first strategy meeting. He had slept little. The images from the night before haunted him. They clung to his thoughts like shadows that refused to lift, each photograph a reminder of how vulnerable the family had once been. It was not only the invasion itself that unsettled him, but the realization that the threat had been hidden in plain sight for many years. A quiet danger, almost forgotten, yet still capable of shaking the institution he would one day lead. The meeting room had been chosen for its privacy. Thick walls, secure doors, and no windows. Around the table sat three of his most trusted advisors, a senior intelligence liaison, the palace's chief security officer, and the private secretary. Each brought a different expertise, but all shared the same apprehension. William began with a simple statement. "We must determine how deep this goes, and we must do it quietly." The security chief was the first to speak. He explained that the location was not accidental. Royal Lodge was a softer target than the palace, fewer security sweeps, fewer restrictions on storage, a long history of visitors, and a resident who, through no fault of her own, had lived through periods marked by financial strain and complicated associations. A hiding place chosen not out of loyalty, but out of obscurity. The intelligence liaison presented a brief analysis. The photographs indicated access to both staff areas and private quarters. The notes showed understanding of palace security patterns. Whoever had created them operated with insider knowledge. The question was whether the individual had acted alone or as part of something larger. The private secretary shifted the conversation to public risk. If the photos ever surfaced, even without context, the press would erupt into a frenzy. The narrative would spiral out of control. Conspiracy theorists would resurrect every rumor surrounding the late Princess Diana. The monarchy would once again be buried beneath speculation. William listened carefully, then asked a question that made the room fall silent. Could the person responsible still be around? The intelligence liaison admitted the possibility. The timeline was long, but patterns of infiltration often involved people who blended in easily. Staff turnover, changing roles, and new contractors over the years made it difficult to rule anyone out. Some individuals might still be in positions with access to sensitive areas. William clasped his hands, steady but tense. Then we cannot allow even a hint of this beyond these walls. We handle it quietly, methodically, and we do not make panic our advisor. He asked for a complete reconstruction of movements in the years the photos were likely taken. He wanted a list of anyone with access to the rooms in question. Staff records, contractor logs, visitor entries, everyone, no matter how seemingly insignificant. The palace would conduct the review under the guise of routine security modernization. No one outside this circle would know the real reason. When the meeting ended, William stepped out into a quiet courtyard. The winter air was crisp and the sky stretched in a pale blue arc above him. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, as though the cold might steady him. He needed clarity. He needed perspective. Most of all, he needed to protect the family from another cycle of intrusion. Later that morning, he arrived at Clarence's house to meet his father. King Charles had been briefed briefly, but awaited a full explanation. When William entered, the king was standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back, the sunlight outlining him with a soft glow. He listened without interruption as his son explained the photographs, the surveillance notes, and the discovery at Royal Lodge. When William finished, the king turned slowly, his expression grave. Charles had spent a lifetime navigating storms of public scrutiny. But this was different. This was not outside pressure. It was an internal breach, a betrayal of proximity. He placed a hand on William's shoulder. "You will carry the crown one day. What you do with this now will shape how you lead in the future." William absorbed the words. There was no accusation in them, no fear, only a sober acknowledgement of the moment's weight. They discussed possible routes forward. Transparency was too risky. Silence was too dangerous. A careful middle path had to be charted. Charles advised caution. Find the truth quietly, protect the family, and when the time comes to speak of it, choose your moment. Not every truth must be shouted. Some must be handled like glass. William nodded. He understood. The monarchy endured not through noise, but through steadiness. That evening, William met again with his team. Strategy had begun to take shape. The photographs would remain sealed under the highest classification. The review of staff and visitors would begin immediately. Anyone whose name appeared repeatedly during the time frame of the intrusion would be flagged for closer scrutiny. He also made a decision that surprised some but felt inevitable to him. He asked that Sarah Ferguson be informed of the new findings. She deserved to know how serious the matter had become. And despite her complicated history with the institution, she had a right to understand why her home had been targeted. The private secretary arranged a quiet follow-up meeting. When the Duchess arrived, William greeted her with the same measured calm as before, but this time his eyes carried a heavier truth. He explained that the materials found were not simply forgotten documents, but evidence of long-term unauthorized surveillance. He made clear that she was not suspected of involvement. The Duchess pressed her hand to her chest, visibly shaken. "My home," she whispered. "My home was used for this?" William nodded gently. She wiped at her eyes, trying to steady herself. She apologized again, not out of guilt, but out of the sorrow of being drawn into something far greater and far darker than she had imagined. He reassured her that the palace would shoulder the investigation. She would not face the storm alone. As she left, she paused at the doorway. "Please protect the boys," she said quietly. "Your mother would want that." The words settled heavily on him. He carried them back to the palace like a private vow. That night, William returned to his private quarters. He stood alone for a long moment, gazing at a framed photograph of his mother. She was smiling, radiant, unaware of the lens that had captured the image decades ago. A pang of memory flashed through him, her laughter, her strength, her fear of being watched. Then he made his final decision. He would not allow history to repeat itself. The days ahead would be quiet, precise, and controlled. There would be no leaks, no whispers, no careless hands. He would follow the trail wherever it led. And when he became king, the monarchy would be better shielded than it had ever been in the past. For now his path was clear. The shadows had been exposed, and he would face them head-on. The discovery at Royal Lodge changed everything. For Prince William, it was a turning point, a lesson in vigilance, and a reminder that the crown's greatest threats often rise from silence. If you want the next chapter of this royal investigation, subscribe and follow this unfolding story.